It's July 20th, 1969. The entire planet is watching. Families huddle around television sets, their eyes fixed on a grainy black-and-white image. A man in a bulky spacesuit descends a ladder, his voice crackling through the static. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong plants the American flag on the moon, and the crowd at Mission Control erupts in cheers. For millions, it is the pinnacle of American achievement, the triumph of democracy, freedom, and ingenuity over tyranny and oppression. America, the nation that defeated fascism, had now conquered space. But beneath the celebration, hidden in classified files and buried histories, there was a darker truth. The Saturn V rocket that carried Armstrong to the moon did not come solely from American hands. Its architect was Wernher von Braun, a man who once wore the uniform of Hitler's SS, a man whose rockets had rained down on London, a man whose weapons had been built with slave labor in underground Nazi camps where thousands perished. And he was not alone. Von Braun was one of more than 1,600 Nazi scientists, engineers, and doctors secretly brought to the United States after World War II under a classified program called Operation Paperclip. These men, many of them deeply implicated in crimes against humanity, were shielded from prosecution, given new lives, and put to work building America's Cold War arsenal and its future in space. Tonight, we'll unravel the hidden history of Operation Paperclip, how it began in the chaos of Germany's defeat, how America justified protecting war criminals, how these men shaped everything from rockets to medicine to chemical warfare, and how their presence in America continues to haunt our understanding of morality and progress. So let me ask you, can we celebrate achievements like the moon landing without acknowledging the shadows that lay beneath them? And if the price of progress is compromise with evil, what does that say about the nation that made that choice? The final months of World War II were a strange mixture of devastation and opportunity. Allied troops marched into Germany, uncovering evidence of unspeakable crimes. At Buchenwald, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen, survivors emerged like walking skeletons from behind barbed wire. The world saw the depth of Nazi evil, and vows of never again rang across liberated Europe. Yet even as generals and journalists documented atrocities, another group of men were focused on a different task: seizing scientific knowledge. Because in the midst of its madness, the Nazi state had invested staggering amounts of resources into advanced technology, jets capable of outrunning any Allied aircraft, rockets that could strike a city from across the English Channel, experimental nerve agents deadlier than anything known to man, submarines that could cross oceans unseen, even rumors of atomic research, though less developed than America's Manhattan Project. Allied intelligence units, particularly American and Soviet teams, began a frantic race to capture these secrets. It was known as the War for the German Brainpower. Soldiers were dispatched not just to seize towns, but to raid laboratories, archives, and hidden bunkers. The Americans formed groups like T-Force and ALSOS Mission, charged with gathering scientific materials before they could be destroyed or fall into Soviet hands. They swept through universities, factories, and alpine hideouts, rounding up scientists along with documents, prototypes, and even crates of uranium ore. Sometimes they arrived only hours before Soviet troops, and the scientists themselves knew the game. Many had quietly prepared for this moment. Some burned documents, others packed carefully selected notes and drawings to use as bargaining chips. They understood that in defeat, their knowledge was the one thing of value they had left. In this atmosphere, morality blurred. Were these men criminals, complicit in Nazi crimes, or were they valuable assets who could help rebuild the world? For American officials staring down a future where the Soviet Union was already poised to become the next enemy, the answer was clear. Knowledge mattered more than justice. The war might have ended in Europe, but a new war had already begun, one that would not be fought with tanks and rifles, but with missiles and science. And whoever controlled the scientists of Nazi Germany would control the future. The centerpiece of this scientific scramble was the V-2 rocket and the man behind it, Wernher von Braun. From a young age, von Braun dreamed of exploring the stars. He studied physics and engineering, devouring science fiction novels, imagining rockets carrying men to Mars. But his ambitions required funding, and in Nazi Germany, the only path forward was through the military. Von Braun joined the Nazi Party and later the SS, securing resources to pursue rocketry. His creation, the V-2 rocket, was the world's first long-range ballistic missile. Standing over 45 feet tall, powered by liquid fuel, it could soar into the edge of space before plunging down on its target at supersonic speeds. For the people of London, Antwerp, and Paris, the V-2 was a terror weapon. It arrived without warning. No air raid siren, no defense. Thousands were killed as the rockets slammed into cities. But the true horror lay in how they were built. Hitler moved production underground to avoid Allied bombing, creating the Mittelwerk facility near Nordhausen. There, prisoners from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp were forced into slave labor. They worked 12 to 14-hour shifts in dark, airless tunnels. Starvation, disease, and beatings were rampant. Guards executed workers for the smallest infractions. It is estimated that more than 20,000 prisoners died in the construction of V-2 rockets, more than the number of people killed by the rockets in combat. Survivors described corpses hanging from cranes as warnings. Von Braun later claimed he was only a scientist, that he did not control the labor system, that he visited rarely. But documents show he knew about the conditions, and he himself admitted being aware of the suffering. Yet when Germany collapsed, von Braun and his team carefully prepared their escape. They destroyed key documents to prevent Soviet capture, then surrendered deliberately to American forces in Bavaria. The Americans recognized his value instantly. His SS record, his knowledge of Dora, his role in Hitler's war machine, these would be rewritten, softened, or erased. Wernher von Braun would soon be recast not as a war criminal, but as a visionary pioneer, his rockets redirected from destruction to exploration. He would go from the tunnels of Mittelwerk to the spotlight of NASA, from a servant of Hitler to the architect of the Apollo program. His journey encapsulates the contradiction of Operation Paperclip. Genius entwined with atrocity, science purchased at the cost of justice. Operation Paperclip was not just a recruitment drive, it was a cover-up. Officially called Operation Overcast at first, it was launched in 1945 by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency under the U.S. Army, later involving the OSS and eventually the CIA. Its mission: identify, extract, and resettle German scientists in the United States. But there was a problem. Many of these men had troubling pasts. They were Nazis, SS officers, men who had overseen forced labor or conducted experiments on prisoners. Bringing them to America openly would have been politically impossible, especially as the Nuremberg trials were unfolding. The solution was bureaucratic sleight of hand. Scientists' files were sanitized. Negative information, party membership, SS rank, evidence of war crimes was removed or downplayed. A paperclip attached to the file indicated that this man was special, that his past was to be ignored in favor of his usefulness. And so men who should have faced trial instead boarded ships and planes bound for New York, Boston, or Galveston. By 1946, more than 1,600 scientists and their families had been relocated. They were placed in secret at military bases like Fort Bliss in Texas or White Sands in New Mexico, where they continued their research under American supervision. Official cover stories were created. Many were given new biographies, scrubbed clean of Nazi ties. Some were even granted American citizenship. In public, America spoke of justice, liberty, and human rights. Behind closed doors, it was willing to make deals with men who had built weapons for Hitler, as long as those weapons, or new ones, could now serve American interests. The secrecy was absolute. Even many members of Congress had no idea what was happening. For years, Paperclip remained hidden from the public, its records locked away, its architects silent. It was, in every sense, a shadow operation, an experiment in rewriting morality for the sake of power. The legacy of Operation Paperclip is visible everywhere in America's Cold War history. Von Braun and his rocket team first worked on military projects, developing the Redstone missile, America's first large ballistic missile, followed by the Jupiter series. These weapons became part of America's arsenal in the escalating standoff with the Soviet Union. But von Braun's greatest triumph came when he moved to NASA. There, he led the development of the Saturn V rocket, the massive machine that carried astronauts to the moon. On television, he became a celebrity, appearing on Walt Disney's programs to explain the wonders of space travel, his past reduced to a footnote. Without him, the space race might have been lost. In medicine, men like Hubertus Strughold advanced space physiology, studying how the human body could survive in zero gravity and vacuum. Strughold is remembered by some as the father of space medicine, yet evidence later linked him to Nazi experiments on prisoners exposed to freezing temperatures and low-pressure chambers. For decades, the U.S. Air Force named awards after him. Only in the late 20th century was his past fully acknowledged. Other scientists brought expertise in chemical and biological warfare. German research into nerve agents like sarin and tabun fed directly into America's own weapons programs. Specialists in aviation developed high-speed aircraft designs, influencing jets that dominated the skies in Korea and Vietnam. Even intelligence benefited, with former German experts advising on psychological warfare and interrogation techniques. The impact cannot be overstated. America's military might, its space exploration, its scientific edge in the Cold War, each was shaped by men who had once pledged loyalty to Hitler. Yet their victims were erased. The slave laborers of Dora, the prisoners of medical experiments, the cities bombed by V-2 rockets, they rarely entered the narrative. Instead, the story told to the public was one of American genius, as if these achievements emerged from nowhere. Operation Paperclip succeeded in advancing America's power, but it also succeeded in burying the truth. The Cold War turned Operation Paperclip into a justification rather than a scandal. The Soviet Union was running its own recruitment operation, taking thousands of German scientists eastward. Some worked on rockets, leading to the R-7 that launched Sputnik in 1957, stunning the world and igniting the space race. Others contributed to nuclear research, aviation, and military industry. For American officials, the fact that the Soviets were using Nazi expertise made paperclip seem not only acceptable, but necessary. If we hadn't taken them, the Russians would have, became the refrain. Yet the moral problem never went away. Was it worth sheltering men who had overseen slave labor, who had experimented on human beings, who had designed weapons for a genocidal regime? By protecting them, America denied justice to their victims. Nuremberg was meant to establish a principle that crimes against humanity would not go unpunished, no matter who committed them. But paperclip carved out an exception, saying, in effect, justice applies only to those we do not find useful, and so files were doctored, accusations ignored, survivors silenced. It wasn't until the 1980s, when declassified documents revealed the scope of paperclip, that the American public learned the truth. Many were shocked to discover that heroes of the space race had once been Nazis. For decades, textbooks and documentaries had celebrated them without mentioning their pasts. The revelation complicated the narrative of American triumph, showing how ideals were bent and compromised in the name of survival and dominance. And it raises a haunting question. If America was willing to overlook such crimes for the sake of power, what does that say about the line between democracy and the enemies it claimed to oppose? Perhaps the most unsettling legacy of paperclip is not the rockets or the medicine, but the reminder that nations often sacrifice principle for expedience, and that the cost is paid not in boardrooms or laboratories, but in the forgotten lives of those who suffered. So, what do we make of Operation Paperclip today? On one hand, it undeniably changed history. It gave America the technological edge to compete with the Soviet Union, to win the space race, to put a man on the moon. Without paperclip, the Cold War might have played out very differently. On the other hand, it represents a deep moral failure. It showed that even as America promised freedom and justice, it was willing to conceal the truth, to harbor war criminals, to trade morality for power. The scientists of paperclip walked freely, won accolades, shaped the modern world, while their victims lay in unmarked graves or lived forgotten lives of trauma. And that is the tension we live with. Can we admire the Saturn V rocket without remembering the tunnels of Dora Mittelbau? Can we celebrate medical advances without acknowledging the experiments that preceded them? Can we believe in American exceptionalism when the truth reveals choices as compromised as those of the regimes it fought? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones, because history is not just about what happened, it is about what we choose to remember and what we choose to forget. Operation Paperclip reminds us that progress often comes at a cost, and that sometimes the price is paid by those who never consented to it. What do you think? Was Operation Paperclip a necessary evil in the fight against the Soviets, or was it a betrayal of the very principles America claimed to defend? Comment your thoughts below, and let me know what hidden stories of history you'd like me to explore next.